I stared at the falsified timesheet in my trembling hands, showing 38 hours when I had actually worked 46 hours last week. My manager, Brad, had stolen 8 hours of my overtime pay, and this wasn't the first time. When I brought my evidence to HR Representative Sarah expecting swift action and justice, she barely glanced at my documentation before dismissing me with those crushing words, "It's not a priority right now, we have bigger issues." She walked away, leaving me standing there holding proof of theft, my heart pounding with disbelief and rage. That evening, staring at my unpaid bills scattered across my kitchen table and my empty refrigerator, I realized the company would never protect me. I had to protect myself. My name is Donna, and I work as a customer service representative at Midwest Distribution Center in Ohio. At 28 years old, I'm a single mother trying to raise my 8-year-old daughter, Emma, on an hourly wage that barely covers our basic needs. Every dollar matters when you're choosing between groceries and keeping the electricity on. The first time I noticed something wrong was 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning. I always keep careful track of my hours because overtime pay makes the difference between having enough money for Emma's school supplies or asking her teacher if she could borrow from the classroom stash. I had worked a full shift Monday, staying 2 extra hours to handle a system crash that left customers waiting on hold. According to my personal notes, I clocked in at 8 in the morning and left at 6:30 that evening, 10.5 hours total. But when I checked the electronic timesheet system the next day, it showed I had worked only 8 hours. The overtime was gone, vanished, like it never happened. I figured it must be a computer glitch. These things happen, right? Technology fails sometimes. I printed out my personal time log and headed to Brad's office to get it corrected. Brad Wilson manages our entire customer service department. He's one of those guys who always seems helpful and concerned, nodding sympathetically when you explain a problem, making you feel like he really cares about finding a solution. He has this way of tilting his head slightly when you talk, like he's giving you his complete attention. "Oh, absolutely, Donna," he said when I showed him the discrepancy. "Let me look into this right away. You know how these computer systems can be. Probably just a processing delay. I'll have it fixed by tomorrow." I felt relieved walking out of his office. Brad seemed genuinely concerned, and I trusted that he would handle it quickly. But tomorrow came and went. Then the next day, and the next. When I checked my timesheet again, those 2 hours of overtime still weren't there. This time when I approached Brad, his response felt different, less warm, more dismissive. "Are you sure you actually worked those extra hours?" he asked, not looking up from his computer screen. "Sometimes when we're tired, we lose track of time. Maybe you left earlier than you thought." The suggestion stung. I keep meticulous records specifically because I can't afford to lose money to confusion or poor memory. I showed him my notes again, but he just shrugged. "Well, the computer system is pretty accurate. If it says 8 hours, that's probably what happened." I left his office feeling frustrated but not yet suspicious. Maybe I had made a mistake somehow. Then it happened again the following week. This time, I had worked a full shift plus 4 hours of overtime, helping with inventory processing. I made extra sure to note my exact clock in and clock out times, even taking a photo of the time clock display with my phone when I left. 12 hours total on Wednesday. Thursday morning, the system showed 8 hours, 4 hours of overtime gone. That's when I started paying closer attention to my coworkers' experiences. During our 15-minute break, I casually mentioned my timesheet problems to Jenny, who works in shipping. "Oh my God," she said, nearly choking on her coffee. "I thought I was going crazy. Last month I worked overtime 3 different days, but my paycheck was way smaller than I expected. When I asked about it, Brad said there must have been some mistake with how I was calculating my hours." Tom from inventory overheard our conversation and joined in. "Same thing happened to me. I worked a double shift 2 weeks ago when someone called in sick, but somehow my timesheet only showed regular hours. Brad told me the system automatically adjusts for meal breaks and said I must have taken longer lunches than I realized." The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't a computer glitch affecting just me. This was a pattern. Over the next week, I began documenting everything systematically. I created a spreadsheet tracking my actual work hours against what appeared in the company system. I asked Jenny and Tom to do the same. I started taking photos of time clocks, saving email conversations, and keeping detailed notes about every interaction with management. The evidence was undeniable. Brad was systematically stealing hours from our paychecks. In just 3 weeks of careful documentation, I calculated that he had stolen approximately $400 in wages from me alone. $400 that should have gone toward Emma's soccer registration fee, toward fixing our washing machine that had been broken for 2 months, toward the pile of medical bills from her strep throat infection in the spring. Jenny's losses totaled around $300. Tom was missing nearly $600 in overtime pay. We started quietly asking other department members if they had noticed similar problems. The scope was staggering. Nearly everyone had experienced mysterious hour reductions, unexplained schedule changes, or overtime that simply disappeared from their records. Most people had assumed it was their own mistake, or had been told by Brad that they were misremembering their actual work times. I gathered witness statements from 5 coworkers who were willing to document their experiences in writing. I collected photographs of original time punch records that contradicted the final payroll data. I compiled emails where Brad had asked people to work extra hours, then compared those requests to the hours that actually appeared on their paychecks. The evidence painted a clear picture of deliberate, systematic wage theft affecting our entire department. Armed with this comprehensive documentation, I felt confident that bringing this to HR would result in swift action. Wage theft is illegal. Companies have policies against this kind of behavior. HR departments exist specifically to handle these situations and protect employees from management abuse. I was ready to file my complaint and get justice for myself and my coworkers. That's when everything started to fall apart. But first, I overheard something that changed everything I thought I knew about Brad's motivation. It was late on a Friday afternoon, and most people had already left for the weekend. I was finishing up some customer follow-up calls when I heard voices coming from the break room. The door was partially open, and I could clearly hear Brad talking to Derek, who manages the warehouse operations. "You've got to see my numbers this quarter," Brad was saying, his voice filled with pride. "Labor costs in customer service are down 18% from last quarter. Corporate is thrilled." Derek responded with something I couldn't quite make out, but then Brad continued. "I've got some creative scheduling solutions that really boost department profitability. You should try some of these strategies in the warehouse. There are ways to optimize labor expenses that most managers never think of." They both laughed, and I heard Brad say something about making the numbers work and keeping the big bosses happy. My blood went cold. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't a computer glitch or poor record keeping. Brad was intentionally stealing our wages as a strategy to improve his department's financial performance. He was literally taking money out of our pockets to make himself look good to corporate executives. I sat frozen at my desk, listening to him brag about robbing his own employees to advance his career. That's when I knew I had to act. This wasn't just about getting my $400 back anymore. This was about stopping a criminal who was systematically exploiting every person in our department. I gathered all my evidence, organized it into a clear professional presentation, and scheduled a meeting with HR. I was about to learn just how deep this corruption really went. I scheduled my meeting with Sarah Martinez, our HR representative, for the following Monday morning. I spent the entire weekend organizing my evidence into a comprehensive presentation, confident that any reasonable professional would immediately recognize the severity of the situation and take swift action. Sarah had always seemed competent and fair in her dealings with employees. She handled benefits questions, efficiently managed vacation scheduling without drama, and generally maintained a professional demeanor that inspired confidence in her ability to resolve workplace issues objectively. I arrived at her office 10 minutes early, carrying a folder containing printed documentation, witness statements, and photographic evidence of the systematic wage theft. My heart was beating fast, but I felt optimistic. Finally, I was taking this through the proper channels. Finally, justice would be served. Sarah welcomed me into her office with a warm smile and offered me coffee, which I declined because my nerves were already running high enough. Her office was neat and organized, with motivational posters about teamwork and corporate values lining the walls. A framed certificate displayed her human resources certification prominently behind her desk. "What can I help you with today, Donna?" she asked, settling into her chair with a notepad ready to take notes. I opened my folder and began presenting my case methodically. I showed her the spreadsheet documenting my stolen hours, the photographs of time clock records that contradicted payroll data, and the written statements from coworkers describing identical experiences. Sarah listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions and taking detailed notes. She seemed genuinely concerned as I explained the pattern of systematic wage theft affecting our entire department. "This is very serious," she said when I finished my presentation. "Wage and hour violations are something we take extremely seriously here at Midwest Distribution. I want you to know that you did the right thing bringing this to my attention." Her response filled me with relief and validation. Finally, someone in authority was taking this seriously and recognizing the gravity of the situation. "I'm going to need to keep copies of all this documentation so I can conduct a thorough investigation." Sarah continued gathering up my carefully prepared evidence. "I'll need to interview the employees who provided statements and review all the relevant payroll records." She assured me that the company had zero tolerance for this kind of behavior, and that if my allegations proved accurate, appropriate disciplinary action would be taken immediately. "How long do you think the investigation will take?" I asked. "I should be able to get back to you within 3 to 5 business days with an initial assessment," she replied. "These matters require careful review, but I understand the urgency of resolving payroll discrepancies." I left her office feeling hopeful and proud of myself for taking action. The system was working exactly as it should. I had identified a problem, gathered evidence, and reported it through proper channels. Now the professionals would handle it. 3 days passed without any communication from Sarah. I figured she was being thorough, which was probably good. Complex investigations take time, especially when they involve reviewing payroll records and interviewing multiple employees. On the 4th day, I sent a polite email asking for a status update on the investigation. No response. By the 5th day, I was starting to feel anxious. I called Sarah's office and left a voicemail asking her to return my call when she had a chance. She finally called me back on day 6. "Hi, Donna. I wanted to give you an update on your complaint," she said. But her tone had completely changed from our initial meeting. Gone was the warmth and concern. Her voice sounded formal and distant. "I've completed my preliminary review of the documentation you provided, and I have to say the evidence is somewhat inconclusive. Payroll discrepancies can occur for many different reasons: missed meal breaks, early clockouts, system processing delays. Without more definitive proof, it's difficult to substantiate claims of intentional wage theft." I was stunned. The evidence I had provided was comprehensive and clear. Multiple employees experiencing identical patterns of missing overtime pay, photographic documentation of discrepancies, witness statements, corroborating systematic hour manipulation. "What about the witness statements from other employees?" I asked. "Well, employee perceptions of their work hours can be unreliable," Sarah replied. "People sometimes misremember their actual start and end times, especially during busy periods. The computer system provides a more objective record of actual hours worked." The response felt like a slap in the face. She was essentially calling me and my coworkers liars, or suggesting we were too incompetent to keep track of our own work schedules. "I'd like to schedule another meeting to discuss this further," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and professional. "Of course, how about Thursday afternoon?" During our second meeting, Sarah's demeanor was even more defensive and dismissive. She had clearly decided that my complaint was without merit, and nothing I said seemed to change her position. "Donna, I want to be direct with you about something," she said, leaning back in her chair with her arms crossed. "Making unsubstantiated accusations against management can create a hostile work environment for everyone. It can also put your own employment status at risk if you continue pursuing complaints that lack sufficient evidence." The implication was crystal clear: drop this complaint or face potential termination. "Are you threatening my job for reporting wage theft?" I asked, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "Not at all," Sarah replied smoothly. "I'm simply advising you that false accusations against management can be considered insubordination or creating workplace disruption. I want to make sure you understand the potential consequences of continuing down this path." I left that meeting feeling confused, frustrated, and increasingly suspicious about Sarah's motivations. Her complete reversal from our initial conversation felt deliberate and calculated. That afternoon, I decided to do some casual observation around the office. I wanted to understand Sarah's relationship with Brad and whether there might be any personal connections influencing her handling of my complaint. What I discovered made everything make sense. At 5:30 that evening, I watched through the parking lot window as Sarah and Brad walked out of the building together, chatting comfortably as they headed toward the same car. Sarah got into the passenger seat of Brad's blue Honda Accord, and they drove off together. They were carpooling every day. Over the next week, I paid closer attention to their interactions around the office. They clearly had a personal friendship that extended beyond professional collaboration. They shared inside jokes during meetings, coordinated their lunch breaks, and seemed to have an easy familiarity that suggested a long-standing relationship. I also learned through casual conversation with other employees that Sarah's husband, Kevin, worked in Brad's department as a warehouse coordinator. Kevin's job security and potential for advancement depended entirely on Brad's good opinion and favorable performance reviews. Suddenly, Sarah's dismissal of my complaint and her veiled threats about my employment made perfect sense. She had multiple personal interests in protecting Brad from consequences regardless of the evidence against him. The HR representative who was supposed to protect employees from management abuse was personally invested in covering up that abuse. But I still believed the system had safeguards for exactly this kind of situation. If local HR was compromised, there had to be higher-level oversight that could provide objective investigation and resolution. That's when I made the decision to go over Sarah's head to the regional HR director. I was about to discover that the corruption went much deeper than I had imagined. Late one Thursday evening, I was working overtime to catch up on customer service calls when I noticed a light still on in Sarah's office. Most of the administrative staff left by 5, so it was unusual for her to still be there at 7:30. I walked past her office on my way to the restroom and glanced through the partially open door. What I saw made my blood run cold. Sarah was standing next to her paper shredder, feeding documents through the machine. I could only see the papers for a few seconds before they disappeared into strips, but they looked like standard HR complaint forms, the same type I had filled out when submitting my wage theft report. She was destroying employee complaints. I ducked back around the corner and watched from the hallway as she continued shredding papers for several more minutes. When she finished, she gathered up the paper strips, dumped them into a trash bag, and carried the bag out to the dumpster behind the building. I waited until she left, then went to investigate her office. The shredder was still warm, and tiny bits of paper clung to the cutting blades. I managed to extract a few small fragments that had gotten stuck in the mechanism. Most were too small to read, but one piece was large enough to show part of a signature, and the words, "wage complaint," in the subject line. Sarah wasn't just dismissing employee complaints about wage theft. She was actively destroying the evidence that complaints had ever been filed. I realized that mine probably wasn't the first report of Brad's criminal behavior. Other employees had likely tried to seek help through proper channels only to have their complaints buried and their evidence destroyed. The entire HR system at Midwest Distribution was designed not to protect employees, but to protect management from accountability. But I wasn't ready to give up. There had to be someone higher up in the company hierarchy who would take this seriously and demand proper investigation. I was determined to find that person no matter how far up the corporate ladder I had to go. The regional HR director, Michael Thompson, seemed like my best hope for getting objective investigation and resolution. His office was located 2 hours away in Columbus, and according to the company website, he oversaw HR operations for 6 different distribution centers across Ohio and Michigan. I spent considerable time crafting a comprehensive written complaint that documented not only the original wage theft allegations, but also Sarah's dismissive response and apparent destruction of employee complaints. I included copies of all my evidence witness statements and a detailed timeline of events. Submitting the complaint through the online portal felt like a significant escalation, but I was confident that someone at the regional level would have the authority and objectivity to conduct a proper investigation. Michael responded within 2 days, which impressed me. His email was professional and reassuring, expressing serious concern about my allegations and requesting a video conference to discuss the matter in detail. During our initial 45-minute conversation, Michael seemed everything that Sarah was not: attentive, thorough, and genuinely committed to investigating employee complaints properly. He asked detailed questions about the wage theft patterns, took extensive notes about Sarah's handling of my original report, and expressed particular concern about the possibility that employee complaints were being destroyed. "This is exactly the kind of situation that requires immediate attention," he said during our call. "Wage and hour violations are serious legal matters, and any indication that local HR is failing to investigate complaints properly represents a significant compliance risk for the company." He outlined a comprehensive investigation plan that would include independent review of payroll records, interviews with affected employees, and audit of HR complaint handling procedures. He assured me that he would personally oversee the process to ensure objectivity and thoroughness. I want you to know that the company takes retaliation against employees who report legitimate concerns very seriously, Michael continued. You're protected by both company policy and federal law from any negative employment actions related to filing this complaint. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuine hope that justice would be served and the systematic wage theft would be stopped. Michael promised to complete his investigation within 2 weeks and provide me with a comprehensive report of his findings and recommended actions. 2 weeks passed, then 3, then a month. When I finally received Michael's response, I could hardly believe what I was reading. After conducting a thorough investigation into your allegations against Midwest Distribution Center management, I have found no evidence of systematic wage and hour violations, his report stated. All payroll records appear accurate and properly maintained. Employee work schedules and overtime calculations conform to company policy and federal labor standards. The investigation that was supposed to be comprehensive and independent had apparently consisted of interviewing only Brad and Sarah, the exact people accused of wage theft and complaint suppression. Based on conversations with department management and HR personnel, the payroll discrepancies you identified appear to result from misunderstandings about meal break policies and overtime eligibility requirements. The report continued. I recommend that you review the employee handbook sections regarding time recording procedures and overtime authorization. Michael's conclusion was that I had simply misunderstood company policy and mistakenly believed I was owed money that I had never actually earned. But the worst was yet to come. Within days of receiving Michael's report, the retaliation began in earnest. Brad started assigning me the most difficult customer service cases, angry clients with complex problems that required hours of research and follow-up. He scheduled me for the worst shift combinations alternating between early morning and late evening hours that made childcare arrangements nearly impossible for Emma. When I made minor mistakes that would normally be overlooked, Brad wrote them up as formal performance infractions. He criticized my work publicly during team meetings, suggesting that I was struggling to meet basic job requirements. Most damaging of all, he reduced my hours to just above the minimum threshold for full-time status, cutting my weekly schedule from 45 hours to 32 hours. The lost income was devastating to my already tight budget. My coworkers, who had previously been willing to discuss their own wage theft experiences, suddenly became distant and reluctant to engage in any conversation about workplace problems. Word had clearly spread that speaking up about management issues was dangerous for job security. Jenny from shipping stopped eating lunch with me and avoided making eye contact when we passed in the hallway. Tom from inventory became monosyllabic when I tried to discuss work issues, clearly afraid that association with a troublemaker would make him a target for retaliation. The isolation was almost as painful as the financial hardship. Lisa Rodriguez, a veteran employee who had worked at Midwest Distribution for over 10 years, approached me quietly during a break one afternoon. "I went through the exact same thing you're experiencing," she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear our conversation. About 2 years ago, I filed complaints about Brad manipulating schedules and shaving hours from people's paychecks. She described a pattern identical to what I was experiencing. Initial dismissal by Sarah, escalation to Michael, a sham investigation that concluded no wrongdoing occurred, followed by systematic retaliation that made her work life miserable. "I fought it for 8 months, Lisa continued. Lost nearly $3,000 in reduced hours and missed overtime opportunities. Eventually, I just had to accept it and try to fly under the radar. That's the only way to survive here." Her advice was clear. Give up the fight, accept the theft, and hope that keeping quiet would eventually restore my hours and shift assignments to normal. But I wasn't ready to surrender. The principle mattered too much, and I couldn't stand the idea that Brad would continue stealing from other employees while facing no consequences for his criminal behavior. However, I was beginning to understand that the entire company hierarchy was designed to protect management from accountability. Sarah covered for Brad because of their personal relationship. Michael covered for Sarah because addressing her misconduct would reflect poorly on his own oversight of regional HR operations. Everyone in the system had incentives to maintain the status quo, regardless of how much employees were being harmed. That's when I discovered just how deep the corruption really went. I was cleaning out my desk one afternoon, preparing for the possibility that continued retaliation might eventually cost me my job when I found something that changed everything. Wedged behind one of the desk drawers was a manila folder that had apparently been left by the previous employee who used this workstation. The folder contained photocopies of HR complaint forms dating back 3 years. As I read through those documents, I realized I was looking at 15 different complaints from various employees, all reporting identical patterns of wage theft by Brad Wilson. Stolen overtime hours, manipulated schedules, disappeared meal break, pay, altered time records. Every single complaint had been filed with Sarah Martinez. Every single complaint had been dismissed as unsubstantiated or resulting from employee misunderstanding of company policy. But these weren't just individual cases of minor payroll confusion. The pattern was clear and systematic. Brad had been stealing wages from employees for years, and HR had been systematically covering it up. The dates on the complaints showed that this had been going on since at least 2 years before I was hired. The total amount of stolen wages documented in just these 15 cases exceeded $25,000. I finally understood the scope of what I was fighting against. This wasn't just corruption. It was organized crime being conducted under the protection of corporate policies and procedures. But now I also understood that the company's internal systems would never provide justice. Everyone with authority to stop the theft was personally invested in maintaining the status quo. If I wanted to stop Brad from continuing to rob my coworkers, I was going to have to look outside the company for help. That's when I started researching my legal options and discovered that wage theft is not just a company policy violation. It's a criminal offense that can be prosecuted by state and federal authorities. For the first time in months, I felt like I might actually have a path to justice. Facing the complete failure of every internal company system, I turned to the corporate ethics hotline as my final attempt to resolve this through official channels. Surely I thought an independent ethics reporting system would provide the objective investigation that had been denied by local and regional management. The corporate ethics hotline was prominently featured on posters throughout our workplace, advertising 24-hour availability for reporting concerns about fraud, harassment, safety violations, and ethical misconduct. The marketing materials emphasized that reports could be made anonymously and promised thorough investigation by independent professionals. I spent several hours crafting a detailed submission that outlined the complete pattern of wage theft, HR cover-up, and management retaliation. I included specific dollar amounts of stolen wages, names and dates of affected employees, and documentation of the systematic destruction of employee complaints. The online submission system allowed me to upload supporting documents, so I attached copies of my evidence photographs of altered time records and witness statements from coworkers. I made the report anonymous to protect myself from further retaliation, but provided enough specific detail to enable a comprehensive investigation. Within a week, I received an automated response acknowledging receipt of my ethics complaint and providing a case number for tracking purposes. The message assured me that all reports were taken seriously and investigated promptly by qualified professionals. For several days, I felt cautiously optimistic. Maybe this independent system would finally provide the objective oversight that had been missing from every previous level of escalation. That optimism was shattered when Brad called me into his office the following Monday morning. "I understand you've been making some serious allegations about this department," he said, his voice calm, but his eyes cold with anger. "I want you to know that filing false accusations against company management is grounds for immediate termination." My heart started racing. There was only one way Brad could know about the anonymous ethics complaint. The supposedly independent hotline had forwarded my report directly back to the same management I was reporting. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to maintain my composure, while my mind raced through the implications. "Don't insult my intelligence, Donna," Brad replied. "You think filing anonymous complaints protects you from the consequences of making false accusations. You think you can damage people's reputations and careers without facing any accountability for your actions." He leaned forward across his desk, his voice dropping to an intimidating whisper. "Let me be very clear about your situation. You are one write-up away from termination for performance issues. Your attitude and work quality have declined significantly over the past month, and several customers have complained about your service. One more incident and you're gone." The threat was unmistakable. "Stop pursuing complaints about wage theft or lose my job. Furthermore," Brad continued, "I want you to understand that your accusations against me and this company constitute defamation. If you continue making false statements about wage and hour violations, the company will pursue all available legal remedies to protect its reputation." I left his office feeling completely defeated and terrified about my employment security. The ethics hotline that was supposed to provide protection for employees reporting misconduct had instead exposed me to direct retaliation from the very people I was trying to stop. Over the following weeks, my work situation became unbearable. Brad cut my hours further, scheduling me for only 28 hours per week. The lost income pushed me to the breaking point financially. I received an eviction notice from my landlord, warning that I had 7 days to pay 2 months of back rent or face removal proceedings. Emma started asking why we were eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner 3 nights in a row, and whether we would have to move again like we did after the divorce. I tried to reassure her that everything would be fine, but the fear in her 8-year-old eyes broke my heart. At work, Brad documented every minor mistake I made with formal disciplinary reports. He criticized my phone manner with customers, questioned my break timing, and suggested that my attitude problems were affecting the entire team's performance. The psychological pressure was overwhelming. I started having trouble sleeping constantly, worried about when the next shoe would drop and whether I would be fired before I could find another job. My coworkers avoided any association with me, clearly afraid that being seen talking to the department troublemaker would make them targets for similar treatment. The isolation made every day at work feel like walking through enemy territory. Lisa approached me one final time during a break, her voice barely audible as she urged me to stop fighting and accept the situation. "They're going to destroy you if you keep this up," she whispered. "I've seen them do it before. They'll make your life so miserable that you'll end up quitting, and then they'll tell everyone you left because you couldn't handle the job requirements. Please just let it go before you lose everything." Part of me wanted to take her advice. The financial stress was crushing Emma, was suffering from our instability, and I was mentally and emotionally exhausted from months of fighting an apparently hopeless battle. But every time I considered giving up, I thought about the 15 other employees whose complaints had been buried and forgotten. I thought about future workers who would be hired into this department and systematically robbed of their wages while management faced no consequences. I couldn't live with myself if I walked away, knowing that my silence would enable continued criminal behavior. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I was cleaning out my desk one evening, preparing for the possibility that I might be fired the next day, when I made a discovery that shifted my entire understanding of the situation. Hidden behind a loose panel in the bottom drawer was another folder of documents that had been left by a previous employee. But these weren't just complaint forms. These were internal company communications between Brad and higher-level executives. As I read through the emails and memos, I realized that the wage theft wasn't just a local problem being covered up by regional management. It was part of a deliberate corporate strategy to reduce labor costs through what they euphemistically called schedule optimization and payroll efficiency measures. One memo from Brad to the district manager bragged about reducing departmental labor costs by 22% through creative scheduling solutions that maximize productivity while minimizing overtime expenses. Another email chain discussed expanding these efficiency strategies to other locations, with Brad providing training to managers at sister facilities on how to optimize payroll management. The company executives weren't ignorant of the wage theft. They were actively encouraging it as a profit enhancement strategy. I finally understood why every level of the company hierarchy had refused to investigate my complaints. They weren't covering up criminal behavior. They were protecting an organized criminal enterprise that operated under the cover of legitimate business practices. But this discovery also gave me something I hadn't had before: evidence that this was a federal crime involving interstate commerce and coordinated criminal conspiracy. I no longer needed the company to investigate itself. I needed law enforcement agencies with the authority to prosecute corporate crime. That night, I researched state and federal agencies responsible for investigating wage theft and labor violations. I learned about the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division, state labor enforcement agencies, and federal prosecutors who handle white-collar crime. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a realistic path to justice. The company had failed to protect me, but there were systems outside the company that existed specifically to hold employers accountable for criminal behavior. I was finally ready to fight back with real weapons instead of internal complaint forms that disappeared into shredders. After months of futile attempts to resolve the situation through company channels, I finally understood that justice would only come from outside authorities with the power to investigate and prosecute criminal behavior. I started researching state and federal agencies responsible for protecting workers from wage theft. The Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Industrial Compliance and Labor seemed like the logical first step. According to their website, they specifically handled complaints about unpaid wages, overtime violations, and employer retaliation against workers who report labor law violations. On a Tuesday evening after putting Emma to bed, I called the state wage theft investigation hotline and spoke with Rachel Thompson, a labor investigator who specialized in systematic employer violations. Rachel's response was immediately different from every company representative I had dealt with. She listened carefully to my description of the wage theft patterns, asked detailed questions about the scope of the violations, and expressed serious concern about the systematic nature of what I was describing. "What you're describing isn't just a payroll dispute," she said. "Systematic wage theft affecting multiple employees over several years constitutes criminal theft under Ohio law. If your allegations are accurate, we're looking at potential felony charges against management." For the first time in months, I was talking to someone who understood that this was a crime, not just a workplace disagreement. Rachel explained that the Department of Labor took these cases very seriously, particularly when they involved patterns of employer retaliation against workers who attempted to report violations through proper channels. Federal law provides specific protections for employees who file complaints about wage and hour violations, she continued. Your employer cannot legally reduce your hours, change your working conditions, or threaten your employment in retaliation for reporting suspected labor law violations. I scheduled an in-person meeting with Rachel for the following week and began preparing comprehensive documentation of everything I had discovered. I organized the evidence chronologically, starting with my initial discovery of missing overtime hours and continuing through the systematic company cover-up and retaliation. When I met with Rachel at the Department of Labor offices in Columbus, I brought copies of payroll discrepancies, witness statements from affected coworkers, photographs of altered time records, documentation of HR complaint suppression, and the internal company communications I had discovered that revealed corporate awareness of the wage theft. Rachel reviewed the evidence carefully and confirmed that this appeared to be a clear case of systematic labor law violations. "This isn't the first complaint we've received about Midwest Distribution Center," she revealed. "We've had 3 anonymous tips over the past 6 months suggesting wage and hour problems at your facility, but we didn't have enough specific information to launch a formal investigation." She explained that my comprehensive documentation provided exactly what they needed to begin a full-scale investigation into the company's labor practices. "We'll start by conducting discrete interviews with former employees who are no longer subject to retaliation," Rachel said. "If they confirm the patterns you've documented, we'll move to the next phase of investigation." Over the next 2 weeks, Rachel contacted several employees who had left Midwest Distribution over the past year. Their statements corroborated everything I had reported and provided additional evidence of wage theft affecting departments beyond customer service. Marcus Johnson, who had worked in shipping until 6 months ago, described systematic manipulation of overtime records that cost him approximately $800 over his final year of employment. When he complained to management, his hours were reduced and his shift assignments were changed to make his job more difficult. Angela Foster, a former warehouse employee, reported that Brad had instructed supervisors to clock people out for meal breaks even when they worked through lunch to meet shipping deadlines. The practice cost affected employees 30 to 40 minutes of pay per day. David Chen, who had worked in inventory control, described a pattern where employees were required to arrive 15 minutes early for shift briefings, but were not allowed to clock in until their official start time. Over the course of a year, this practice resulted in approximately 65 hours of unpaid work time. The investigation expanded as Rachel discovered that similar practices were occurring at Midwest distribution facilities in Michigan and Indiana, suggesting a coordinated corporate policy rather than isolated local management misconduct. Based on what we're finding, this appears to be a multi-state criminal enterprise involving systematic theft of employee wages, Rachel told me during one of our regular update calls. "We're coordinating with federal investigators because this crosses state lines and affects interstate commerce." For the first time since discovering the initial wage theft, I felt genuine hope that justice would be served and the criminal behavior would be stopped. Rachel also provided me with crucial information about my legal protections as a whistleblower in this investigation. Under federal law, your employer cannot retaliate against you for cooperating with a Department of Labor investigation, she explained. If they reduce your hours, change your working conditions, or threaten your employment, that constitutes additional federal crimes that we can prosecute. She gave me detailed instructions on how to document any further retaliation and provided me with a direct phone number to report new incidents immediately. But the most important development came when Rachel introduced me to the undercover investigation component of their enforcement strategy. "We're going to place an undercover investigator as a new employee in your department," she said. "This person will be trained to recognize and document wage theft practices while gathering evidence for potential prosecution." The investigator would work alongside me and other employees for several weeks, experiencing firsthand the wage manipulation tactics that I had been reporting. This would provide prosecutors with direct evidence of ongoing criminal behavior rather than just historical documentation. "Your role will be to continue working normally while the undercover investigator observes management practices," Rachel explained. "Don't change your behavior or try to point out violations. We want to document the systematic nature of these practices as they occur naturally." I also learned that the investigation had attracted attention from federal prosecutors who specialized in white-collar crime and organized criminal enterprises. "The Department of Justice is reviewing this case for potential federal prosecution under racketeering statutes," Rachel said. "When companies systematically steal from employees across multiple states, it becomes a federal crime with much more serious penalties." The scope of the investigation was expanding far beyond what I had originally imagined. What started as my complaint about missing overtime hours had uncovered evidence of a criminal enterprise that was stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from workers across multiple states. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. During one of my meetings with Rachel, she shared information that investigators had discovered while reviewing Midwest Distribution's corporate communications and financial records. "We found evidence that the wage theft practices you identified weren't just ignored by corporate executives," she said. "They were actively encouraged as part of a profit enhancement strategy." The internal documents revealed that Brad's success in reducing labor costs through payroll optimization had earned him recognition and bonuses from corporate headquarters. His techniques were being taught to managers at other facilities as best practices for improving departmental profitability. Corporate executives knew exactly what was happening and incentivized managers to continue stealing from employees, Rachel continued. "This transforms the case from local management corruption into an organized criminal conspiracy involving the highest levels of the company." The evidence suggested that Midwest Distribution had systematically stolen millions of dollars from employees across their entire network of facilities, using sophisticated techniques to avoid detection while maximizing illegal profits. But perhaps the most satisfying discovery was that all of this criminal activity was about to come crashing down around them. "We're preparing search warrants for simultaneous raids on multiple company locations," Rachel said. "When we execute those warrants, we'll be seizing financial records, computer systems, and internal communications that will provide prosecutors with everything they need to pursue criminal charges." The investigation had reached the point where law enforcement was ready to take decisive action against the organized criminal enterprise that had been operating under the cover of legitimate business practices. I was about to witness justice being served in a way that would have been impossible through any company complaint system. The undercover investigation began 2 weeks later when Special Investigator Maria Santos was hired as a temporary customer service representative in our department. Maria had extensive experience working undercover for labor enforcement agencies and was trained to recognize and document wage theft practices while maintaining her cover as a regular employee. To everyone else, Maria was simply a new hire learning the customer service systems and procedures, but she was actually gathering evidence of criminal activity while wearing a concealed recording device provided by federal investigators. I continued working my regular schedule while Maria observed the department's operations. It didn't take long for her to witness the systematic wage theft that I had been reporting. During her first week, Maria watched Brad instruct a supervisor to manually adjust time records for 3 employees, reducing their recorded hours to eliminate overtime pay. She recorded him explaining that we need to keep labor costs under budget, and that corporate doesn't need to know about every little scheduling irregularity. The federal investigators had equipped Maria with sophisticated recording equipment that captured both audio and video evidence of management instructing subordinates to falsify payroll records and steal employee wages. But the real breakthrough came during Maria's second week, when she recorded a conversation that revealed the true scope of the criminal conspiracy. Brad was training a new supervisor from the Michigan facility, sharing techniques for reducing labor costs without detection by corporate audits or employee complaints. The key is making small adjustments that look like legitimate schedule corrections, Brad explained during a conversation that Maria recorded from the next cubicle. Take 15 minutes here, 30 minutes there. Don't be greedy and try to steal whole hours at once because that's what gets employees suspicious. He went on to describe sophisticated methods for manipulating meal break records, altering overtime calculations, and intimidating employees who questioned payroll discrepancies. If someone complains, you document performance problems and reduce their hours, Brad continued. Most people will shut up and accept the theft rather than risk losing their jobs entirely. The recording provided federal prosecutors with direct evidence of criminal intent and systematic coordination of wage theft across multiple facilities. Meanwhile, my own situation at work continued to deteriorate as management increased their retaliation against me. Brad scheduled me for split shifts that made childcare arrangements nearly impossible. He assigned me the most difficult customers and criticized my performance when complex problems required extended resolution time. He documented every minor mistake in formal disciplinary reports and suggested that my declining performance was affecting team morale. But now, instead of feeling helpless against the retaliation, I was carefully documenting every incident and reporting it immediately to Rachel Thompson. Each act of retaliation constituted additional federal crimes that would be included in the eventual prosecution. The psychological pressure was still intense, but knowing that federal investigators were building a criminal case against Brad and the company made the daily harassment bearable. Emma noticed the change in my attitude and asked why I seemed less worried about work problems. I found some people who are going to help us fix the bad things happening at my job, I told her. It might take a little while longer, but the grown-ups who make the rules are going to make sure the bad behavior stops. The investigation took a dramatic turn when federal agents discovered that the wage theft scheme involved coordination with financial institutions and accounting firms that helped the company hide stolen wages in their official records. This is much bigger than we initially realized, Rachel told me during one of our weekly updates. The company was using sophisticated accounting techniques to disguise stolen wages as legitimate business expenses. This suggests involvement by professional accountants and financial advisors. The Department of Justice had assigned a team of federal prosecutors who specialized in complex, white-collar criminal enterprises. The case was being developed under federal racketeering statutes that carried potential prison sentences of 20 years for each defendant. We're not just looking at individual managers stealing from employees, Rachel explained. We're investigating an organized criminal conspiracy that involves corporate executives, accounting professionals, and systematic coordination across multiple states. The scope of the investigation had expanded to include dozens of current and former employees, corporate executives, financial records dating back 5 years, and communications between company officials and external accounting firms. But the most shocking development came when Maria recorded a conversation that revealed Brad's criminal behavior extended far beyond simple wage theft. During a lunch conversation with the Michigan supervisor, Brad bragged about creating entirely fictitious employees in the payroll system and collecting paychecks for people who didn't exist. I've got 3 phantom employees on the books who work full-time overtime shifts, Brad said, unaware that Maria was recording every word. Corporate thinks we're paying these people, but the money goes directly into my personal account. I've made an extra $40,000 this year from phantom payroll alone. This revelation transformed the case from wage theft into major embezzlement and financial fraud involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Your manager isn't just stealing from employees, Rachel told me after reviewing Maria's recordings. He's stealing from the company itself through elaborate financial fraud schemes. This makes him vulnerable to federal charges that carry potential sentences of up to 30 years in prison. The evidence also revealed that Brad had been teaching these phantom employee techniques to other managers, creating a network of criminals who were systematically defrauding both employees and the company through coordinated schemes. Federal investigators began coordinating with IRS criminal investigators, banking fraud specialists, and prosecutors from multiple states to build the most comprehensive case possible against the criminal enterprise. We're preparing for simultaneous raids on 6 different company facilities and the homes of 12 individuals who appear to be involved in this criminal conspiracy, Rachel said. When we execute these search warrants, we'll be seizing computers, financial records, and evidence that will allow prosecutors to pursue the maximum penalties under federal law. The investigation had reached the point where law enforcement was ready to take down the entire criminal organization. But the most satisfying revelation came when federal investigators discovered evidence that corporate executives had been skimming money from the phantom employee schemes for their own personal benefit. The executives who were encouraging wage theft weren't just trying to improve company profitability, Rachel explained. They were taking percentages of the stolen money for themselves through bonuses and profit-sharing arrangements tied to reduced labor costs. This discovery meant that criminal charges would extend to the highest levels of the company hierarchy, ensuring that everyone involved in the conspiracy would face serious prison time. The investigation was about to culminate in a coordinated law enforcement action that would bring down the entire criminal enterprise and provide justice for hundreds of employees who had been systematically robbed. I was finally going to see the people who had stolen from me and my coworkers face real consequences for their criminal behavior. The day of reckoning was approaching, and it was going to be more comprehensive and devastating for the criminals than I had ever imagined possible. The coordinated federal raids began at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning across 3 states simultaneously. Federal agents executed search warrants at Midwest distribution facilities in Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana, while additional teams raided the homes and offices of company executives suspected of involvement in the criminal conspiracy. I was working my regular morning shift when 12 federal agents entered our facility with a search warrant authorizing seizure of payroll records, computer systems, and financial documents related to the wage theft investigation. The entire building was secured as agents methodically gathered evidence while employees watched in stunned silence. Most of my coworkers had no idea that a federal investigation had been underway for months, or that their workplace was the center of a major criminal enterprise. At 9:15 that morning, I watched as federal agents arrested Brad Wilson at his desk in front of the entire customer service department. As they read him his rights and placed him in handcuffs, I felt a sense of justice and vindication that I had been waiting months to experience. Bradford Wilson, you are under arrest for violations of federal wage and our laws, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement of company funds, and operating a criminal enterprise in violation of federal racketeering statutes, the lead agent announced as Brad was escorted out of the building. The sight of Brad being led away in handcuffs was one of the most satisfying moments of my entire life. Sarah Martinez was arrested at her home that same morning on charges of conspiracy to obstruct justice, destruction of evidence, and participation in the criminal enterprise. Federal agents seized her personal computer and boxes of documents that she had apparently taken home from the office. But the arrest didn't stop with local management. Michael Thompson, the regional HR director, who had dismissed my complaints and conducted the sham investigation, was arrested at the Columbus office on federal charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. Even more satisfying, company executives at the corporate headquarters in Detroit were arrested on racketeering charges related to their role in coordinating and profiting from the systematic wage theft across multiple facilities. The scope of the federal prosecution was staggering. 12 individuals were charged with various federal crimes, including wire fraud, embezzlement, racketeering, conspiracy, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. The evidence seized during the raids revealed that the criminal enterprise had stolen approximately $2.3 million from employees across the company's network of facilities over a 5-year period. Federal prosecutors announced that the company would be required to pay full restitution to all affected employees, including interest and penalties for the stolen wages. Within 2 weeks of the arrests, I received a check for $1,847 representing my stolen wages plus interest and penalties. The money allowed me to catch up on rent, pay Emma's school fees, and finally fix our broken washing machine. But the financial restitution was only part of the justice served. Brad Wilson ultimately pleaded guilty to federal racketeering charges and was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay complete restitution to all affected employees and forfeit assets purchased with stolen wages. Sarah Martinez pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for testifying against higher-level executives. She received 18 months in federal prison and was permanently banned from working in human resources. Michael Thompson was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months in federal prison for his role in covering up the criminal conspiracy and obstructing the investigation. The corporate executives who had encouraged and profited from the wage theft received sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years in federal prison, along with millions of dollars in fines and restitution orders. The company itself faced federal monitoring requirements, mandatory implementation of new payroll oversight systems, and regular audits to prevent future wage theft. Perhaps most satisfying of all, the federal prosecutor specifically credited my courage and persistence in pursuing the case despite systematic retaliation and institutional resistance. Without Ms. Patterson's determination to seek justice and her willingness to cooperate with federal investigators, this criminal enterprise would have continued stealing from workers indefinitely. U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh said during a press conference announcing the plea agreements. The successful prosecution also had personal benefits for my career and financial situation. Midwest Distribution, desperate to rebuild their reputation, after the federal prosecution offered me a promotion to assistant customer service manager with a significant salary increase and comprehensive benefits package. The new management team, operating under federal oversight, implemented strict policies to prevent wage theft and established multiple channels for employees to report labor violations without fear of retaliation. I accepted the promotion and used my new position to train employees about their rights and help establish systems to prevent future exploitation. The local media coverage of the federal prosecution inspired other workers in our community to report wage theft at their own workplaces. I began volunteering with a workers' rights organization to help people understand how to document violations and report criminal behavior to appropriate authorities. Emma was incredibly proud when she learned that her mother had helped catch criminals and protect other workers from being treated unfairly. "You're like a superhero for people who work," she told me one evening while I was helping her with homework. The experience taught me that individual courage and persistence can overcome even systematic corruption when combined with proper legal channels and professional investigators who take criminal behavior seriously. Most importantly, I learned that the systems designed to protect workers do function when accessed through the right channels, even when internal company procedures are completely compromised by corruption. The federal prosecution sent a clear message to employers throughout our region that wage theft is a serious crime with severe consequences, not just a civil dispute that can be resolved through internal complaint procedures. 6 months after the arrests, I received a letter from Rachel Thompson informing me that similar investigations had been launched against 3 other companies in Ohio based on employee complaints inspired by our case. "Your willingness to pursue justice despite personal cost has created a ripple effect that is protecting workers throughout the state," she wrote. "Thank you for having the courage to fight back against systematic exploitation." The letter reminded me that standing up for what's right, even when it seems hopeless, can create positive change that extends far beyond your own immediate situation. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that the most important lesson wasn't about wage theft or federal prosecution or corporate crime. It was about the power of refusing to accept injustice, even when every system seems designed to perpetuate that injustice. When companies fail to protect workers, there are external systems that exist specifically to hold employers accountable for criminal behavior. When internal complaint procedures are corrupted, federal law enforcement agencies have the authority and resources to investigate and prosecute organized criminal enterprises. But those systems only work when individual workers have the courage to access them and persist through the inevitable retaliation and intimidation that criminals use to protect their schemes. The choice to fight back against wage theft wasn't easy, and the personal cost was significant. But the alternative, allowing criminals to continue stealing from workers while facing no consequences, was unacceptable. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones that seem impossible to win. Sometimes the system works, but only when you find the right part of the system and refuse to give up when the first attempts fail. Most importantly, sometimes individual courage can create changes that protect not just yourself, but countless other people who face similar exploitation and abuse. The criminals who stole from me and my coworkers are now in federal prison, and the systems that protected them have been dismantled by federal oversight. Justice was served, and it was worth every difficult moment of the fight. Have you ever experienced wage theft at your workplace? Or do you know someone who has had their wages stolen by dishonest employers? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story helped you understand your rights as a worker or inspired you to take action against workplace exploitation, please hit the like button to help spread awareness about these important issues. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for justice and fighting back against corruption. And please share this video with anyone who might benefit from learning about workers' rights and legal protections. Thank you for watching, and remember that your courage to fight injustice can create positive change that extends far beyond your own situation.